Welcome to the content for week 4. This week, we'll have a series of online modules that you'll be covering. Initially, we're going to be looking at accessibility and equity, and this will be the basis for Theme 2. After that, we'll have a quick presentation about health and safety and why workplace health and safety is important for you generally, and also why this is important for you when you are undertaking the tasks for Theme 2. After that, we'll have a section on tips and tricks for reading journal papers. In the workshop for week 4, we'll be going through more details in how to undertake Theme 2, and then also we'll be looking at some journal papers which will help you. Accessibility is a really important concept for engineers to think about. Engineers are involved in designing infrastructure, and this infrastructure is used by people. Therefore, we really have a responsibility to ensure that this infrastructure is accessible to everybody in today's society and that there's equitable use of the infrastructure that is made. And I really liked this quote by Robert Hoffman, and it was, "You don't realize as an engineer what an influence you can have in society. By making buildings, transport and infrastructure more accessible, we can make a huge difference to a lot of people's lives." So we'll be examining more about this topic in this video. The term universal accessibility is all about ensuring that everybody in our society has the equal ability to use services and facilities. So it means that their use can be independent of help. They don't need help to use these different services. They can have the same entry and evacuation as others. And also, this is for a whole range of different users, so regardless of disability, age, or gender. So it's a way of ensuring that it's equitable. Universal design is another term that you may encounter, and this is about the process of really ensuring this universal accessibility, but it can be used in a number of different applications. So universal design is really about ensuring that systems are usable by people of all ages and abilities to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. You may encounter the term universal design when you're talking about software and websites. And this, particularly in education provision, is really important. So it's ensuring that everybody, all students, have equal access and they can all access the materials easily and that nobody's disadvantaged. So transportation is a very important aspect of infrastructure in cities. Accessible transport is really critical because it's needed in order for people in our society to access other services and to really take part in society. So, for example, if people were to access other services such as banking or education, or even going to the grocery store or going to a hospital, transportation is important because that's the link between leaving their house and accessing these services that should be really accessible to everybody in the community. So when you're talking about transportation, you really need to evaluate the whole journey from door to door. And so not only does this include things like the provision of information, so people need to have information about these different services, but it also includes the pedestrian environment, the interchange between different modes. So for example, if you have to get from the bus to the train, and it also includes both hard infrastructure, so stations, ramps, footpaths, and also soft infrastructure. So things like how is the information provided and maybe how payment systems work. And so it has to be equitable. So I'm sure you can think about that there's some common issues which are relating to transport accessibility. So for example, if we're talking about pedestrians, some of these issues may be due to non-existent or poorly maintained pavements, potentially inaccessible overpasses or underpasses, crowded pavements, physical lack of traffic control, or even when you're crossing the street, there can be a lack of aids for people with sensory impairments. So in Australia, in Sydney, we typically have the sound at the crossings. So people with visual impairments can hear the sound and then they know that it's safe to cross. And then there also could be dangerous local traffic behaviours. So people maybe not stopping at zebra crossings or traffic lights. And so these issues can make it really difficult for people moving along footpaths and within common streets. Some other issues relating to public transport, such as rail systems and ferries, or even bus transit systems. So the ability to get into the vehicles from the platforms. This can be a limitation if there's a big height difference. Similarly, if there's a gap between the vehicle, for example, with many bus stops, and the ground. Once you're in the vehicle, if there's no space for wheelchair access or anchoring, or if that space is limited, typically in a lot of buses in Sydney, there's only space for 2 wheelchairs or 2 prams. So this can make it really challenging if they're already full. You have to wait for the next service. And then also if there's difficulties in getting information on when the accessible bus or if it's difficult to find information on timetabling as well, that's another limitation. And not only is it has to be suitable for people in wheelchairs, but there's a whole range of different situations that people might find difficult. So for people with visual impairments, they might find it difficult to navigate if, for example, there aren't tactile surfaces, and so they can't feel where they need to go. But also for the elderly as well, or people who maybe just aren't quite as physically able to move around. So if they have to walk long distances or lots of stairs, or even areas where there aren't seats to sit down while they're waiting for services, these can result in big issues and really limit the way that they can get around in society. So if we want universal accessibility, these are areas that really need to be looked at. So why are there inaccessible infrastructure? So there was this really nice paper by Agarwal and Steele, and this is presented on Moodle if you want to have a look. And so they really identified 4 key reasons. So firstly, there's inadequate knowledge. So really it's that the decision makers don't necessarily understand the implications of the decision making. So for example, maybe they're designing a bus and they're designing it to maximize the number of people who can fit on the bus, but they don't take into account that people in wheelchairs or some people may really like to sit down, and so they reduce the space of these areas. Another one is inadequate understanding. So decision makers may be removed from users and they don't really have an appreciation for the challenges, risks, or local context faced by people with disabilities to really develop an appropriate solution. Similarly, there may be lack of user input. So, and that links in with this inadequate understanding. So if people with disabilities or reduced mobility aren't involved in the design, then they don't get their views and needs considered. So there is leads to that inadequate understanding. And then there's also missed opportunities. So For example, in the design process, maybe the planners and designers might miss opportunities to really make things much easier. They maybe meet the baseline requirements, but they could add something in very easily, such as maybe tactile surfaces or a bench somewhere. And this could make a really big difference to people with disabilities. And so they've missed an easy win. So there was this really lovely video by Catherine Holloway from UCL, and I've put up the link for this on Moodle. So I really encourage you to have a listen to it. I'm not going to play it here. I'll let you go through that in your own time. But it gives a really nice introduction to why accessibility engineering is really important in today's society. So before you go and listen to the next few videos, I'd like you to think about and reflect on your experience with CVN9050. Is there a way, do you think, that we can make it more accessible or maybe more equitable? Is there anything you are finding challenging with the way that we're delivering the course? So have a think, have a reflect, and let me know what your feedback is. You can either email me or pop a comment in the forum, and we do appreciate all feedback.